Today is Thursday, October 14th, 2004. I'm Kathy Bernstein, and I'm visiting with Bert Bilsky, my colleague and friend. We are going to talk with Bert today as part of our celebration of 350 years of Jewish life in America. The Jewish Historical Society has undertaken a community-wide oral history project, and I got Bert to come and sit down, take some time from his busy schedule to visit with us. Thank you, Bert.
I'm delighted.
I'm going to kind of go right through the list, and as you know, Bert, because you've helped me do these, I'd like to know your full name, and I'd like to know about the name Bilsky, and does it have a different, was it changed, where your family originated, and some of that early stuff.
Okay, a brief funny story. My name is Bert, but my real name is Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to Milwaukee, I never liked the name very much. And when I came to Milwaukee, I was driving up from Chicago to go to work for BBYO, which was my first job here in 1970. And it dawned on me around Kenosha that nobody knew me here. And I could be any name I wanted. I could be Rock or Biff or Sean or whatever. And so I started out with those. And I ended up saying to myself, well, I can't go too far with this. But there are two parts to Herbert. There's a Herb part and a Bert part. I was always Herb. I was always Herbie. I didn't want to be her. Yeah, nobody. Well, I don't. That's good. I don't want to.
Of course.
Herbie's a fat little kid with a balloon, So I said, gee, I can be anything I want. So I decided rather than the Herb, I knew somebody whose name was Albert, who used the name Bert.
Uh-huh.
And so I decided I'm going to be Bert.
Well, it's good. It's
Bert
decisive.
ever since. Yeah, I
of
kind
course,
like
sometimes I call you Bertie.
Bertie, yeah, right. And so did Joyce Peterson. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know.
she was my first secretary, and she did that immediately. She called me Bertie.
It's sort of a term of endearment.
But
What about
anyway,
Bilsky?
The Bilsky part is Polish.
Mm-hmm.
My father's family came from Poland. It was either spelled B-I-L-S-K-Y, which is the way we spell it, or B-I-L-S-K-I. And we had relatives in Chicago that spelled it with an I. And it's a town in Poland.
It is a town.
It is a town in
Okay.
Poland. And there are a number of Bilskys, and sometimes it's spelled B-I-E-L-S-K-I,
Yeah.
but we spelled it B-I-L-S-K-Y.
Uh-huh.
And his father and his ancestors came from Poland. His mother's family came from, actually from Baltimore. On my father's mother's side, I'm like a fifth or sixth generation American.
Where had they come from?
Germany.
Germany. Oh.
And her maiden name was Nathanson, and she came from Germany, or she came from Baltimore, but her ancestors came from Germany. On my mother's side, which is what I really know more about because we weren't very close to my father's family, but we were very close to my mother's. And her maiden name was Magduff, and we think it was a joke. We think that when they came from Russia, he came from Pryaslav, my grandfather, and my grandmother came from Odessa, and we think that when he got off the ship and he said his name was Magidov, which probably was like M-A-G-A or D-O-V, or they thought it might be cute to call him McDuff, and so I think it was initially M-A-C-D-U-F-F, and he quickly learned that wasn't going to work in the Jewish community, so he was M-A-G-D-U-F-F.
Before you leave, I will put some stickers up on our little map where your people came
I
from.
was looking for that.
Yeah, because it is what's happening is what we thought, that the Pale settlement and and Germany.
Yeah, those were the two
Yep.
prominent places.
They came because.
They came, again, it's funny because I've done these before, and it's the same story for my grandfather. He was going to be drafted into the Russian army.
You're about the sixth one.
And he decided to beat a hasty retreat. And I think it's interesting that certainly many Jewish people must have gone into the Russian army and probably died in the Russian army or whatever. And it was the cleverest or the most ambitious or the most willing to take the chance people that got out. I don't know how he got out. My mother used to tell me, though, that his family was wealthy. They had something to do with horses. They were either horse traders or horse, they owned stables or whatever, and somehow they managed to get their son out. The rest of the family stayed, as far as I know. But he left and came to the United States and came to Chicago. And he was a salesman. He was a jobber, what they called in those days, and he worked out of the trunk of his car. and essentially he went to he was a toy jobber, and he would keep toys in his trunk, and he would go to stores and sell them and sell samples and then get orders, and he was always very popular because he always had toys in his.
Sounds like Phil Cohen, who he came in and was telling me about he had bought a whole bunch of Dawn dolls. And like thousands of Dawn dolls, which were a cheap copy of Barbie.
Oh.
But he managed to get.
He did all right with them. Whatever he did okay.
He did all right with Dawn.
Yeah. So that was my grandfather. My grandmother, her main name was Lieberman, and there was a big clan of Liebermans in Chicago in the Midwest, and that's really the family I knew. And there was something called the Pearl Lieberman Family Club, and every month in Chicago, there would be a family meeting. And do you remember the movie Avalon? I don't know if you saw that wonderful movie. That's the kind. We used to have family meetings just like that, except that there were like 150 people, and they all crowded it. It was in everybody's house, and people didn't have big houses in those days. But we all got together, and the kids got to know each other. And my mother was the secretary for years, and I still have some of her notes.
Oh, how cute!
And they gave away money. And they helped each other out, and it was
So it was like a little mini philanthropy together with. Did they have friends, or was the family their friends?
Well, my mother and father had a lot.
I'm not
especially
saying
my mother.
they had no friends,
Yes,
but like
we
cousins
grew up with the
clubs
cousins club, and all of our cousins lived within 5 miles in the west side on the west side of Chicago. So we knew all of our cousins, and I didn't have any first cousins. Interestingly enough, my mother had one brother who married very late in life, and I got a first cousin actually probably when I was in my 30s because he married late in life. Well, it was a second marriage, and they had a child. My father had one sister, and she also married very late in life and never had any children. So for a long time we had no first cousins, but we had lots of second and third, and God knows how many removed.
Yeah.
And we used to go to these meetings, and it was a very nice way of getting to know family.
Your father?
My father, Joel Bilsky, he worked for Sears Roebuck for many years as a buyer, and then he apparently this happened not infrequently. He was the protege of another man higher up in the company, and that man got in trouble. And got fired, and my father and a number of other people below him also got fired. Now that's the story I heard. Whether that's exactly the truth, I don't know. But it really led to sort of a downward spiral for him. It was very difficult.
When was that?
This was I was born in 47. This was 49.
Oh.
And my brother, who was born in 1940, was about 12, and I was about 2, and. Sears was one of the earlier companies that did something called profit sharing. So when he left, he had been working there for about 25 years. Matter of fact, that's how he met my mother. My mother was his secretary at Sears. And so he had some money, and he went into a series of bad investments. He bought a candy store in August without air conditioning, and all the candy melted. It was these are legendary stories in our family. And he just was not. He was a schlemazel.
He wasn't a good businessman.
He was not a good businessman. And my mother, however, was. And she, as he started to have difficulties, she became more ambitious, and she was an accountant. She was a bookkeeper, actually, but she became an accountant, and she worked, and she did pretty well.
But there's this huge age difference between you and your brother.
There's, 11.
Were you ever close?
Well,
it's pretty hard.
It was hard to be close. He was already considerably older, although he did stay around in the house, and we were reasonably close.
Were you?
Yeah, it was, and we're still close. I mean, I still see him. He lives down in Chicago.
Because I know you're also close to your brother-in-law.
I'm very close to my brother-in-law and my wife's family.
Yeah, I know.
So
So you grew up there.
Grew up in Chicago.
What kind of Jewish environment did you have? You have this family, this intense family.
Intense family, and my father had no particular interest in religion. My mother's family did, and they made what I would consider a mistake of sending me to a very Orthodox Hebrew school. In those days, in Chicago,
you know a lot.
Well, it was traditional, which was Orthodox in everything except that the women and the men sat together in the synagogue.
Oh, okay.
It's called the Austin Jewish Community Center, and it was I wore tzitzis, and I went to Minyan every morning, and I did all sorts of very Jewish things.
Modani.
Modani, right?
Uh-huh.
Right, every morning.
Uh-huh.
And it just didn't jive with the way my family operated. I mean, my mother cared about it, but she didn't keep kosher. She didn't. And
Did
it
she
really,
light candles?
While my grandmother was alive, we used to go to their house every. This is the typical story.
Sure
We'd go there every Friday night, and my grandmother would light candles, and she would make the chicken soup with the little feet in it, and the feet a lot.
How about, did you get the little eggs?
And the little eggs.
Did you get the eggs, or did your brother?
I don't know. I don't remember. I didn't care much for any of that stuff. So then there was observance at that point. But when my grandmother died, and matter of fact, it was very sad because my grandfather died. It was a very tragic situation. He died in an accident where he was. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny at the time, obviously. He drove into a. It's a story.
Okay, forget it. I can't. It's a long day, Bert.
We'll never get through it. But in any event, when my grandfather died, my grandmother picked herself up and moved into our house.
Which is not uncommon.
And it was very common, and we didn't keep kosher, and she did, and so it created all kinds of havoc in the house. And she only lived for about 2 more years after that. But we really lost touch with tradition and with observance, except for Passover and for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. It became less and less important. But I, meanwhile, was more and more religious. It became a bone of contention with us.
It was like schizophrenic.
It really was. It really was.
How many years did you go to this school? And when did you start?
I started when I was about 7, and it was 4 days a week. And then services on Saturday and Sunday school on Sunday.
Good Lord.
And it was like 2 hours a day. And so I got a pretty good grounding, but I really just sort of lost it on the one hand in terms of observance because nobody around me was doing it. And then we moved when I was in high school. We moved from the west side to the west side of Chicago to West Rogers Park, which was a big Jewish neighborhood.
Right.
And I went to a high school that was like 95% Jewish, a public school.
Did it close on?
It closed on Shavuos. I mean, it was closed for all the Jewish holidays. Everybody became very religious, around the Jewish holidays. And so I was always living in a community that was so Jewish that the observance wasn't what kept me Jewish. And then I got very active in BBYO, and that was a very important part of I sort of transferred my religious belief to a more secular Jewish belief in the importance of Jewish community and saving Soviet Jewry and all the activities involved with BBYO.
When I think of you, when I think of you as a charitable person, and was that something in your household? Did your mother? I mean, was that important?
So
your dad had a hard time.
Yeah, they didn't have the means to be charitable. But my mother was very involved in
Pushka or something.
Well, she was very involved in Hadassah. She was very very much a Zionist. She was a president of the West Suburban Hadassah. She gave lectures about Israel. She was. My mother was a tremendous influence on me in all aspects.
So you would say
of my life.
if you were going to say who was my role model and so on, it was
by
your
far,
mom.
by
Your
far,
mom.
in all ways.
That's nice.
And she was very supportive of me. And even though we didn't have money, I never felt deprived. She always managed to find ways to keep us going.
But I've heard that from everybody. People that you can tell that they didn't have anything, and they didn't know that they didn't have anything.
We sort of knew. I mean, I can remember her having conversations with the electric company about not turning off the power. So we knew, but and most of my friends were much better off than I was. But it never seemed to make a difference. I mean, we just were always able to sort of make it somehow.
So you went to high school?
Went to high school, and when I was 18, I wanted to get out of the house very badly. And but I didn't. The first year I went to the University of Illinois in Chicago. Actually, it was the first year that the campus opened. It was called Chicago Circle. It was 1965, and was downtown Chicago. I went there for a year. I hated it, and I hated living at home. I really wanted to get out of the house badly, but we couldn't afford it, at least not in any traditional way. But my mother had always kept in touch with an aunt who lived, actually a cousin who lived in Washington, D.C. Her name was Betty Wolfson, and her husband had been the Undersecretary of the Interior under Truman, when Truman was the secretary, when Truman was president. And so he was, very involved in government. He passed away fairly young. She lived alone in a big house in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And they were talking one day, and I don't know how she got around to this, but she said, well, why don't you have Bert come, Herbie at that point, come out and live in Washington, and he can stay with me. Totally, it won't cost me anything to live. So I explored the schools there, and George Washington University was the one I chose, and I got in and went to live with her. That lasted about 6 months. It wasn't a great. She really wanted a houseman. So I was mowing the lawn and driving her. It was like driving Miss Daisy, and it was bizarre, and it didn't work out. But my parents, God love them, they said, okay, we'll move into the dorm and we'll take out a loan or we'll find a way to pay for it. And I did. And then I got a job and I got a scholarship and I got.
What kind of job did you get? Waiting tables or something?
I was work study, so I worked for in the business school. I worked in the business school office. No, it wasn't, but it just happened that they had an opening. So I did that for a year, and I sold clothes, a men's clothing store. I worked in a photography, developing.
Did you sell ladies' shoes? So many.
I did sell ladies' shoes. I'm trying to go back. This was back when I was living on the west side. I worked at Kitty Kelly and at Mailings on Madison Street in Chicago, and I must have been like 14. I mean, I had to be because I don't know how I was selling shoes to people at 14, but I was, and yeah, I did that.
Betsy
for years.
Green's dad had
Mailings here in
I've heard
Milwaukee.
more guys tell me that they worked
for Mailings. Well, I worked in Chicago at Mailings. And
so you're in Washington.
So I'm in Washington, and it was great. I loved it. It was the best 4 years of my life. It was the most exciting time to be in Washington. It was 1966 to 1970.
Oh my God, sure, of course.
I mean, everything was going crazy, and I joined a fraternity. It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
What fraternity?
Tau Epsilon Phi.
Oh, okay.
It was a TEP, and it was like a family. I mean, because I didn't go home very much. I couldn't afford it, so I stayed around, and then I would go home with my roommates. I used to go to Newton, Massachusetts, or I go to Maplewood, New Jersey, and I still, keep in touch with these guys. But just one story about school, two stories about school. One was that
I love these stories. You know that.
One was that school was, the people were wonderful. The experience was wonderful. But there was turmoil going on because of Vietnam, and we were constantly being concerned about the draft. I lived under the shadow of that all my career in school, and did all kinds of things not to have to go into the Army. But it was just the whole experience. I was a philosophy major, and when we started out being a philosophy major, they told us that we should save all of our notes and all of our books because there was a comprehensive exam at the end of the 4-year period or your 3-year period of your philosophy curriculum in order to get the degree. You would not get a degree if you couldn't pass the exam. You wouldn't get your BA. Oh. So we all saved our books, and we all saved our notes, and we all studied very hard. And our exam was scheduled for May 1st, 1970. Well, May 1st, 1970 was May Day. That was the day, or the day before, that Nixon bombed Cambodia. Oh. And it showed his hand as not stopping the war. And there was just, everything went nuts. And the exam was canceled. We never took it. So we all graduated and got our degrees. Oh. And because the school closed. I mean, the school closed for weeks after that. And because we were right in the epicenter of it. I mean, our fraternity house was being tear gassed all the time. And the interesting thing too was that George Washington University is right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Especially then, it's gotten to be more of a campus now. It's 4 blocks from the White House, and there were people living in apartments, but they were all being gassed. I mean, it was like a weekly occurrence. It was bizarre. The other story is that, and this has always reminded me of how crazy the world can get, and it reminds me of what's going on now with Iraq to a certain extent. When during all these riots that were going on with students rioting, the police would be marching up and down the streets, and in one of the dorms, it's like an 8-story building, there were kids at the top students throwing water balloons onto the police. And I'm sort of standing there watching this whole thing. And
Where are you?
It's
On the street?
I'm on the street.
Oh,
I'm not in the building. And all of a sudden, the sergeant dispatches like 20 guys from the phalanx of police and says, "Go get those kids." So I'm standing right at the door of the lobby of the building, and I see them running into the lobby, and they start clubbing the people in the lobby, and they start pulling the people in the lobby out and putting and arresting them,
In the
and putting
lobby?
them in the lobby. These are the kids are upstairs throwing
Did
the.
you
they're-
run?
Well, it was so bizarre because they weren't going to bother me. I mean, there were students everywhere. They decided a student is a student. We aren't going to run up to the 8th floor to get those guys that are doing that. We're going to take these. What difference does it make?
Right.
And it's sort of like what's going on with Iraq. It's Al Qaeda, so we'll go get them. I mean, we don't
right.
care.
We don't care who it
We don't care who it is. We'll just go get them. So
What an interesting time
it was
for
a
you.
very interesting time to go to school. It was and when I started there were rules about in the dorms you couldn't have a girl past the first floor. There were curfew. There was by the fourth year when I graduated, there were no rules anymore. I mean, in 4 years, everything was thrown out the window. There were no grades. It was pass-fail. We started out with A, B, C, and D, and we ended up in pass-fail. I mean,
Godless society.
it was crazy. It really was. And now it's all going back to the way it was. But it was a very interesting time.
It was an interesting time. You were lucky to have had the experience.
Yes.
So
It
when
really
you
was. It was
when you
wonderful.
graduated, what happened?
Well, I wanted to
you
go to
then?
law school. I really wanted to go to law, but
Uh-huh.
but the money ran out. There just
Uh-huh.
was nothing. And so, and I had loans. I had to pay back. So I had been very active in BBYO. I was the president or the regional controller in Chicago, and I knew a lot of the BBYO's national headquarters was in Washington, and I had kept in touch with a lot of those people. So I went to the BBYO building and I talked to somebody there, and I said, "Look, I'm graduating college. I need a job. Are there any jobs in BBYO?" And they said, "Sure." And they gave me a couple of cities, and one of them was Milwaukee. And I grabbed that right away because it was near Chicago,
Sure.
and I liked the idea of, I'd be able to go back and forth. And the guy who was the director of BBYO at the time, Harry Goldberg, was somebody I'd known in the program, liked and admired. And I came to work here as a program director in 1970 from Chicago. That's when I drove up and changed my name. So,
Drove up and changed.
right. So I came up here, and I liked Milwaukee right away. And I liked the proximity to Chicago, but I found myself going back less and less. And I loved working at BBYO. We were on Titonia Avenue, 3866 North Titonia. And it was interesting because there were more kids.
What's there anyway?
It's
Right
Titonian Capitol.
Yeah, I was going to say right before.
Right before Capitol. And it was interesting that there were more kids on the west side then than there were on the east side.
Oh, sure.
And it was a big Marshall, and
Sure.
not so much, Washington was already not as
No,
much,
but
but
Marshall
Marshall
was
had a
huge.
huge Jewish population.
Right.
And this office was sort of equidistant between the two sides. And I worked there as program director and then as assistant director. And Joyce Peterson, who worked for me later here at the Federation, was the secretary there. She was the office secretary and manager, and kids loved her, and she was wonderful. And I did that for a number of years. And one day I had to make a presentation here at the Federation for the women's division. And it happened that Ruth Ornstein was the president of the women's division at the time, and I got to meet her and know her a little bit. And I don't know how it then happened, but somehow Marlene, who had moved back to Milwaukee from St. Louis, she had been living in St. Louis and had been married and got divorced and had a little over 1 year old son, Adam. Came back to Milwaukee to live, and the next thing I know, I got, I don't know how I got the call, but Sue Colburn, who was Marlene's very close friend, Jerry and Alice's Colburn daughter,
Of course.
insisted on fixing
The two of
her
you.
up with me. And since Ruth
How
had,
old were you now? Let's see.
I was, it was 1974. It was October 15th, 1974, to be exact.
Tomorrow is your anniversary of meeting.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. That's right. I'm glad you reminded me. And the Israel Philharmonic was coming here to play
Sure.
for the Federation.
Sure.
and Ruthie had tickets, and Bill and Jerry and Alice and Susie, and I got a call, to fix me up with Marlene, and I'd never met her, and it was a true blind date.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, great, why not? So I came to the door, and she had moved out of her parents' house and rented an apartment, and I came to the door, and the most adorable child in the world, Adam, introduced himself to me, and then he introduced all the furniture to me. He said, "This is our couch, this is our chair." I mean, he was like all of about 18 months old. I mean, he was so smart. He was, and he is very smart. And he was adorable. He was just he just was absolutely. And Marlene looked pretty good too.
Yeah.
And
so you decided. How long after you met did you get married?
I knew right away. As far as I was concerned, this was it.
Yeah, well, you kind of decisive.
Yeah, pretty.
Right.
Yeah, and.
But she was just coming off of a bad
marriage.
She
didn't even want to go out. I mean, she did not want to go out.
Yeah, why would she want to go from one thing to another?
Yeah, but we went out October 15th. I still have the poster in my office. I don't know if you noticed it.
I have noticed it.
Yeah, that's why it's there. We got engaged Valentine's Day the following February. And we got married December of 75. In December of 75. And I adopted Adam.
I know you did. And then you had another.
And then almost same kind of
like
spacing with me and my brother. Yeah,
right.
We had Daniel in Adam was born in 1972. Daniel was born in 1982.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about you. I don't want to. And Mr. Bilsky, I'm not looking at my watch because I'm bored.
I know,
I
you
want to make sure we keep everything.
I understand.
I forgot to say that first.
I understand.
You worked at BBYO and.
Remember, I always wanted to go to law school.
I know. Yes. So you
always wanted to go to law school.
So now.
Worked at BBYO. Was a little concerned that being a social worker, in the interim, I got my master's degree in social work at UWM. And actually, I did all my field work at Milwaukee Psychiatric Hospital, and
That's why you do well here.
Thank you. Right, it gave me some excellent background.
I understand.
I really enjoyed clinical work, and
Did you?
I enjoyed therapy, and I would have. I would have pursued that. I got tired of BBYO after a while. It just, not so much tired, but it's hard, and I can sympathize with teachers that you keep getting older, and the kids keep staying the same,
right.
And they want to do all the same stuff every year, and it got
boring.
Yeah, a little boring. So I knew I wanted to do something different, and I probably would have become a therapist. But Marlene and I were talking, and I said I always wanted to go to law school. She said, "Why don't you go?" So sort of on a lark, I took the LSAT and did reasonably well. And the only place I could go and wanted to go was Marquette, because I wanted to stay in town. And she was working at this point for her father at the Freedman Tobacco Company, and she was very involved in that work and liked it very much.
Where was Adam during the day? Did you go to daycare? Or?
Adam always either was in daycare. He was in daycare the first couple of years, and then we always had, I guess you call them now nannies. We always had somebody who stayed with him until he was in school, and then when he was in school full time, there was just somebody there in the afternoons. Because Marlene would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. She would be down to Freedman Tobacco by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. She was very work oriented.
Right.
And I would take care of him in the morning, get him off to school, because I didn't, with BBYO especially, things
Sure.
didn't start till 9:30, 10 o'clock, so that wasn't
just
a problem.
the opposite.
It wasn't a problem.
Law school.
But then so I said, okay, I'll try. So I applied to Marquette, and I got in. And I really just went, and I really didn't think it through that much, because as I went, I realized that I wasn't the same person that I was when I graduated college, and I had learned a lot of things, and I had formulated a lot of opinions about how I fit in the world. And while I liked the education, no, I can't really say that. I didn't like anything about law school.
Really?
It was very regimented. It was we used to have to sit in alphabetical order. I don't know anybody at Marquette whose name doesn't begin with A, B, or C. All the people that I met were all in the first 3 letters of the alphabet. It was ridiculous. And
I just want to ask you something. You just said something. I can't remember the exact words you said. You knew that something about where you fit in the world. Where did you feel you fit in the world then, right that moment, as compared to when you were at George Washington University?
Well, when I was at George Washington and graduated, I thought I was going to go into business. I thought I was going to, go to law school. I would have liked to have gone to law school and then gone into the corporate world.
Okay.
By the time I got through working for BBYO and
field work
the field work and the master's in social work, I was a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I had a very different view of the world, and I realized that I didn't know what I was going to do with the law degree, but I didn't think I would be going into a corporate setting. Although if I had gotten a job, I had applied for a job at MGIC, for instance, and it didn't work out, even though it was Marlene's relatives that were running the place. But if I had gotten that job, maybe I would have stayed in the corporate world, although I don't think so. So anyway, I put my head down, and 3 years later I finished.
Mm-hmm.
It was about it. And it was a rough 3 years, especially for Marlene. It was very tough because my way of dealing with it was just not to talk about it at all.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, so I was spent
nice.
a lot of quiet evenings. I was reading my books, and I also never figured out law school. My son, interestingly, my younger son is applying to Marquette now.
Is he?
Yeah, and I just hope he figures it out because a lot of people did. And if you figure it out, you don't have to read all the stuff, and you don't have to.
That's what my kids said.
Yeah, I mean, there's a trick.
Yeah.
And I never really figured out the trick, so I just read everything.
Yeah,
I decided I better.
I think Elliot did too.
Yeah, and it was okay, but I hated law school. And my senior year, I went to work for Alan Markovitz as a clerk in his office, and he's a fine man.
How old is Alan?
Alan's got to be 75, 74.
I don't know. I think of him as always younger.
Yeah, and he looks
very
he's got to
good.
be in his 70s. And he had a really good practice. And he and I liked each other a lot, and I liked working with him. But I didn't want to go to court. That scared me. And I didn't want to sit in the library. That bored me. And I was alternately bored and scared the entire year. It was awful. It was awful. And so I said, I went into him after a year, and I said, Alan, I can't do this. He said, I could kind of tell you weren't too happy. I mean, yeah. And so I said, I got to find something else to do. So I went to an industrial psychologist here in town, and I said, here are my degrees. Here's my experience. Help me out here. And I took some tests, and the test showed that I had no business practicing law. That it was the most.
Dumbest thing you ever did.
One of the tests I scored the lowest that he's ever seen on for this kind of test to show whether you. The problem is I hate being in the middle between two people. Which is where a lawyer always is,
Yes, he is.
Or she. So they said, well, you shouldn't be doing this. But if you're going to stay with law, since you've gotten the degree, get into like estate planning or trust administration or something that doesn't put you.
It's not adversarial.
Not adversarial, exactly. So I thought I would do that, something like that, and I applied for a job at M&I, and they didn't like my hair was too curly. I don't know. That didn't work out. And then the United Way was looking for somebody to do sort of develop endowment kinds of things. And that looked interesting. And I went to Esther Leah Ritz, who was a family friend, and I asked her for a reference because she was a vice president of United Way. And I said, this is what I'd like to do. And she said, no, I won't give you a reference. I said, oh, Esther Leah, why? She said, because I don't want you to work for United Way. I want you to work for the Federation. She said the Federation needs to develop an endowment fund. And we have had some sort of halfway measures. And you need to do this. And I said, well, I had never thought about it. She said, I want you to go through the interview process.
I'm surprised that your in-laws didn't.
Well, you know what? I think they were too close to it. And also, frankly, Mel Zarrett at that point, which was very logical, I think believed that he would do this after he retired. Because that's what was happening in the field. A lot of retired execs were taking over the endowment field because it really didn't exist. The first endowment funds were created in the 70s, and they really didn't start to get off the ground until the early 80s. So, do we have enough time? Are we?
Yeah, no, we're fine. I'm just watching that.
So I said, okay, sure, I'd be interested, and I'd like to explore it. So I have to go to an interview with the officers of the Federation.
Who are they?
So who's the officers of the Federation? Ruth Ornstein.
All right.
She was a vice president. Bill Ornstein was a campaign chair.
Oh my God.
Max Carl,
Oh,
young Bill Ornstein.
that's crazy.
So it was a little bizarre. And so I'm in the room, and Esther Leah was great. She said, we're not going to hire Bert because of who he's related to. But we're not going to not hire Bert because of who
That's
he's
right.
related to. And I give Mel Zaire a lot of credit, because Mel could have said to himself,
Do I need
do I
this?
need this? I mean,
No.
here, I don't know whether this guy's going to work out, and if he doesn't work out,
That's awful.
what am I going to do? I've got all these people here.
And he was a friend of the
He was,
Ornstein?
he was a friend of, they
All of
were
them.
extremely close, and he took a shot. He didn't shy away from it, and
And here you are.
here I am, almost 25 years later.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Well,
been,
you should feel good.
I do.
One of our questions, what are you most proud of? Other than your children,
I'm most proud of the Jewish Community Foundation.
I would think you would be.
Absolutely.
But what about something of your own? Is there something that you've done?
This is my own.
It, because
This
you
is-
built it.
I don't know that I built it, but
No, but
I
you
was
did.
very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. The field was just opening up. I was handed a book, a notebook from the CJF, the Council of Jewish Federations, on how to run an endowment program, how
You
to
read
set
it?
it up. I read it and I did it.
I
mean,
know,
we just
I
did
know.
all the stuff
Isn't that funny?
that they told us to do.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting because I'm the oldest tenured endowment director in the country. In other words, I'm not the oldest person, but in terms of where I am and how many years I've been doing this. And there are a few of us that are sort of mostly lawyers
Mm-hmm.
that sort of professionalized the field. Up until that time, it was mostly retired execs who were built the relationships and had the relationships. But I was in a very unique position because I knew a lot of, the people that
Sure.
because of my
Your
wife's
influence.
family, and I should say at this point, what a tremendous family
Mhm.
the family is. It's a unique, highly successful group of people. I mean, when you think about it, it's the Ornsteins. Bill Ornstein Jr. is an extremely successful developer. It's the Friedmans, Jerry Friedman, former president of MGIC, FGIC, Amron Mortgage, extremely successful. Bob Habish, who's married to
Oh, no, I mean, it's
not
ridiculous.
It's an incredible family,
Yeah.
and I'm proud to be a part of it, and I'm very proud of my own in-laws and the things they've done. I think that many people in Federation work today count Bill and Ruth as
Absolutely.
mentors and as role models.
Absolutely. Someday, when we go through it, I'll show you the women, the young women. We asked them certain questions years ago. We had them write out a little story and who was a mentor. And Alice and Ruthie and those women
They were extraordinary.
trained a whole generation, and we are the beneficiaries of that.
Right, and they in turn were
leadership.
trained by people like Mel Zaret and
Yeah.
Esther Sarfati.
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law used to tell me all the time that
Esther
Esther would
Cohen.
call, what
Esther
Esther Sarfati especially though would call her
Yes, she
and
did
say,
tell me.
"Come on, Ruthie, brush your hair, put on your lipstick. We're going out to solicit so and so."
Right.
And she'd do it. And
Yeah.
she'd do the work.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Tell me what you think about. I'm interested. So, by the way, you avoided any kind of service, right?
Oh yes, indeed. I
And
did
nothing
it
at
just
all.
about everything I could. I put braces on my teeth.
Did you?
I did.
Who-
I wasn't going to Vietnam.
One of the things we didn't ask, did you ever have any anti-Semitic instance in your life in Chicago? Bob Habish told me today that he had terrible times.
Yeah, it seems to me. I remember him telling me some of
Yeah,
those stories
did you?
too. Not really. We always lived in very Jewish neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were living in shtetls. I didn't,
Right. You
everybody
didn't
was
know it.
Jewish. I didn't,
Right.
I really didn't have any
And as
anti-Semitic there.
adults.
No, as I say, I think I didn't get a job once here because I was Jewish, but
Mhm. And
now,
maybe
now they're courting us. Believe me.
Indeed they are, aren't they?
So-
Well, whoever they are, I know
Yeah.
they are.
But other than that, I really haven't had any.
Any incidents like that? Tell me what you think, if you could predict 10 years from now, what do you think our community's going to look like? Do you have any idea?
Well, I hope we'll finish the campus. I hope the campus will look a
It'll
little
be down
bigger.
and
Yeah.
It'll be
Um,
rubble already.
I don't know. I don't think it's going to be that much different. I think that I
You're
think we'll be.
optimistic?
Yeah, I am very optimistic, and I think I think we'll have the financial wherewithal. I believe. I don't know that we'll be raising as much money on an annual basis, but I think some of the things that have been done and are already in people's plans and estates, and if we invest wisely, and if the economy is decent, I think we'll have a very good foundation, literally as well as figuratively. When I started in 1980, we had $3 million in foundation funds. Now, as you know, we're over $100 million, and I think that there's no reason to think that we won't exponentially increase that going forward. And I also think that we will continue to raise a lot of money on an annual basis too.
Do you?
Mm-hmm. As far as what kind of Jewish community this will be, I don't really know. I think there are institutions in this community that have structural difficulties. No, not so much that they've outlived their usefulness. I don't think that, but I think that synagogues have some very difficult issues to face in terms of the number of people that actually participate in synagogue life, and how many people regard a synagogue as the place they go 3 times a year or twice a year and pay, $1,500 or $2,000 for a ticket.
Right.
You can't look at a synagogue like that and expect that synagogues are going to survive in their present form.
Because too many synagogues?
Well, I don't know that we have too many, because
but some people belong to a whole bunch of them, and I wonder how long,
I don't know how long that's going to happen.
Do you know what I mean?
Right, and I also don't know that we have too many, because I think it's important place for people to have leadership roles. People like certain kinds of leadership involvement in synagogues, but I don't know how we can support synagogues as I see more and more people opting out, opting for other opportunities that they find even more rewarding, that are less expensive, and so
expensive to be. I know from my kids, Nathan and Shannon say it's so expensive to join for them to join a synagogue.
It is. No, it's expensive.
They're gonna have a baby.
It's expensive to run to be Jewish and to have a Jewish life.
It is.
So it's all the more important that those people who understand that and care about it do the kinds of things that we're trying to get people to do in terms of endowing the future.
Right, Book of Life
and all the rest.
And all that good stuff, the
Exactly.
Book of Life, yes. How would you like to be remembered, Bert? What would you like to, or if your boys' children look at this tape 30 years from now, do you have something to say to them?
No, I really don't. I never think about that. I
don't?
try to live in the moment. I try to say things to people now while they're alive. Before my father-in-law died, on his 85th birthday, we had a big party, and I wrote something and I said it to him. I stood up and I said it in front of all the people. I didn't like doing it that way, but I felt I needed to do it because I thought it was important that he hear the words, and I knew that I wouldn't share those words at his funeral.
Right.
And it would be meaningless because he wouldn't be there to hear them.
Right.
I don't think about, the only thing I think about is that whatever I've done for the last 25 years, it's there, and it'll be remembered, for what it was. I also don't think that anybody owes me anything in terms of whatever we've been able to accomplish in the foundation. I get paid very nicely, and I'll do it until I stop doing it, and then I'll stop, and I won't be around anymore. And I will have been very happy and very proud of what.
I have a question for you, as one communal professional to another. Are you involved in any kinds of committees or groups or anything outside of the office?
No, very few, and it's a conscious choice.
What are they?
Well, I was involved
with
the synagogue,
Uh-huh.
Beth Israel, on the board for a number of years, and now we're at Sinai. We've been at Sinai for quite a while, and I've served on a couple of committees. But my job is because of the nature of my family and because of the nature of the relationships, my job really, not that I'm working 24 hours a day or 12 hours a day. I'm not at
understand.
all. But a lot of our social life, especially when my in-laws were healthier and before my father-in-law died, was spent with people like the Edelmans and the Colburns and the Weissmans and you name it. And I still with the Habishes and there's a quasi work. You're never not working when as you well know.
Yes.
And most of the people that we associate with as friends, the Sampsons, the Richmonds, are all people that are very involved in this community. So that's about enough. When I'm done with all that, then I want to be home reading or watching television or being with my wife.
Yeah, I understand.
And so I'm not really active, and I think that when I'm stopped doing this, I'll take a 6-month hiatus, and then I'll figure out.
Well, you're lucky you have friends. One of our colleagues, I said something about, so who are your friends? She said, I have no friends. Because by the time you finish here, it's hard, it's kind of hard.
I do want to say one thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is in closing or
It is in
whatever.
closing.
And that is how fortunate I have been in terms of my wife and my relationship.
Yeah.
We'll be married 30 years actually 29 years in December.
Mm-hmm.
And without her support and without her constant reinforcement of what I do and who I am, I would not be a happy person, and I would not be a fulfilled person. And the fact that we have 2 wonderful kids and now a wonderful daughter-in-law and a grandchild on the way.
On the way.
I mean, that's really what's important. And as I say to my boys, I'm the most married man you'll ever meet, and I only wish that for you,
Right.
that
It's a
you
nice
find
wish.
someone, and that you build a life, because that's what's important. We were talking. I was talking with my son, who's going to be a father in December, and I said to him that he was talking about school. He's in school. He's in graduate school now.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. And I said to him that no matter what you do as a career, the most important thing you're ever going to do is to raise children.
You bet.
And whatever is second is way, way back there.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's my...
Thanks, Bert.
Thank
This
you.
was interesting. It was
I enjoyed
fun.
it. I enjoyed it.
Tell me, how did your father die?
Turn off the...